Welcome to Witch Hunt, the podcast bringing you the most in-depth coverage of the Salem witch trials. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. Today, we are excited to present the second episode in the Salem Witch Hunt 101 series.
We're taking a different approach to this one. I'll be telling a narrative of the events of early 1692.
And I'm hearing this telling of the story for the very first time, just like everyone watching or listening.
Yeah, I've really kept this one under wraps from you, so I can't wait to hear your reactions to it.
I can't wait to hear what you've done with your story.
Scene 1, Salem Village, Massachusetts Bay Colony, February 1692. The girl flitters across the room, chirping like a bird. Abigail Williams, the minister's niece and ward, aged 11, has been acting strangely lately. Perhaps a winter's confinement in a frigid house has given her cabin fever. Maybe she's just restless. A preteen in the boring 17th century? Abigail has been orphaned and lives in the care of her relative, Salem Village minister Samuel Parris, who is known as her uncle, though the exact relationship is unclear. Parris's daughter Elizabeth, called Betty, is at this moment on all fours under a table, barking like a dog, while alternately complaining of terrible pain. Earlier, she had honked like a goose and soared through the air, all the way across the parsonage's great hall. Nobody had seen her toes touching the ground. They'd all been fixated on the honking and flapping, which would have been hard to ignore. Maybe she and her cousin are ill, but strangely, nobody else in the household has been acting anything but normal. Why has the illness not touched Betty's siblings, Thomas and Susanna? Why not Tituba or John? Why not Elizabeth Parris Sr., who seems to always be sick with something or other? Maybe the girls have succumbed to the pressures facing the Parris household this long, cold winter. They received a fraction of the firewood they need to live comfortably, and Samuel often finds himself writing his sermons at Ingersoll's, or sometimes the nearby Walcott home, or even Thomas Putnam's house. With the minister under intense pressure, that may have rubbed off on some of the children. So the minister has prayed for weeks, but nothing in the girls' conditions has improved. They still contort into strange shapes, impossible to be caused by any known natural illness. They writhe in agony and cry out of pain. On Sunday morning, with his sermon written, Samuel Parris leads his family the short distance from their home to the meeting house. Entering, they once again find this building even colder than the house they left. There's no fireplace here. There's no grand hearth for cooking and warming. Measuring a modest 34 by 28 feet, the wooden meeting house features a gallery to help fit the many, many people who worship here. On January 3rd, Samuel had preached that Christ having begun a new work, it is the main drift of the devil to pull it all down. Today, February 14th, he will warn the church of the dangers of division and devilry. It's a woeful piece of our corruption in an evil time, when the wicked people and the godly party meet with vexations by and by to lay down divine providence, as if God has forsaken the earth and there were no prophet in his service. His vitriol is largely directed at those in the village who oppose him. They've challenged his ownership of the parsonage and his role as a minister. The village voted to withhold his pay and firewood, and once Joseph Hutchinson, a village committee member who had donated the land for the meeting house, fenced the building in. Now, for those of you keeping track, Joseph Hutchinson was the birth father of Benjamin Hutchinson, who he'd put in the care of the Ingersolls, who had lost their only daughter. Joseph himself had 7 sons and 4 daughters, so obviously had a kid to spare for the Ingersolls. Today, Parris will also speak of the present low condition of the church in the midst of its enemies. On February 24th, Parris sends John on another errand. This time, he is to retrieve Salem Village's only physician, William Griggs, who lives some distance down the road. After Griggs examines the girl, he pulls Samuel aside for a conversation. "They're under an evil hand," he says. "You're sure it isn't anything medical?" "Absolutely. This affliction is not natural." "Then Satan is after me." "I'm afraid so." In the parsonage and around the village, talk turns to witches. Perhaps the girls were bewitched by one of Satan's agents. Christ knew there were devils in his church. On February 25th, Samuel and Elizabeth Parris travel for the Thursday lecture, a weekly event hosted by various neighboring communities on a rotating schedule. While they are away, a neighbor, Mary Sibley, stays with the children. Mary Sibley speaks with Tituba and John. "Here's what we're going to do," she says. "Tituba, you collect some urine from Betty and Abigail. John, get the rye flour." "What do you have in mind?" Tituba asks. "We're going to stop a witch." "With urine?" "By baking a special cake. The girls' urine is needed so we can burn off some of the magic that the witch put in them." Soon Tituba collects the urine of the girls, and John retrieves the heavy sack of rye flour, while Elizabeth gathers the rest of what they'll need. The three adults meet at the hearth and bake the cake, with the girls wailing in agony behind them and contorting again into several bizarre shapes. After John removes the cake from the oven, Mary calls for the family dog, who eagerly devours the morsel. According to English custom, this witch-finding technique will reveal the identity of the woman who has afflicted the girls. Mary isn't exactly sure how, but her own mother taught her to do this. Maybe the witch will be hurt, or maybe she'll turn up at the door. Now, the same day the witch cake is baked, two more village girls become afflicted. Ann Putnam Jr. is the daughter of Paris ally Mr. Thomas Putnam Jr. and Mrs. Ann Carr Putnam. Thomas and the two Anns have made several visits to the parsonage since Betty and Abigail have been ill. And I want to throw in that Thomas Putnam was also a sergeant in the local militia, serving under Lieutenant Nathaniel Ingersoll and Captain Jonathan Walcott, who are also important characters in the Salem Witch Hunt story. Now, another visitor who's taken ill is Elizabeth Hubbard, an orphan teenage girl living with her relatives, the Griggses. She has also visited the parsonage along with the physician, whom she serves as maid. At 17, Hubbard is 5 years older than Ann Putnam Jr., making her the oldest person yet afflicted and the first of legal age to be able to bear witness in court. Her age lends credence to witchcraft accusations against villagers Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, whom Hubbard accuses of attacking her spectrally, which is to say the shapes of the women appear to her. They do not visit bodily. Everyone knows witches have the ability to leave their bodies and travel great distances to torment their victims. The following 2 days, February 26th and 27th, 1692, will prove pivotal, as these are the days the girls begin naming the names. Not one, but 3 women will be accused by the end of these days. Tituba, the enslaved indigenous woman in the Parris household, is the first accused when Betty and Abigail cry out against her. The woman who has cared for them as much as their own mother has, who will go on to profess much love for them during her examinations by the magistrates. Born in South America or the Caribbean, Tituba may have been an Arawak or a Carib. Parris likely purchased her during his time in Barbados, where he tried to run his father's sugar business before his return to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where he had for a time attended Harvard College, his academic career cut short by his father's death in Barbados. To say Samuel was a poor businessman is quite an understatement. The man seems to never quite settle into a profession at which he will be able to succeed. At any rate, he had Tituba in Barbados, and he brought her to Boston in 1680 or 1681. Except while he served as temporary minister in Stowe in 1685, Samuel remained in Boston working as a merchant until men from Salem Village approached him about being the town's minister in 1688. When he accepted the call in 1689 and moved his family to Salem Village, he brought Tituba with him. It's unclear when he acquired the man known as John Indian, a man of undetermined indigenous background. And for a time, a third enslaved person, an African-American teenage boy, also resided in the parsonage with the Parrises. However, Parris recorded the boy's death in March 1689. While Tituba's exact origin is unknown, Elaine G. Breslau's book, Tituba, the Reluctant Witch of Salem, posits one plausible theory and is very well worth a read. On February 27th, Ann Putnam Jr. accuses Sarah Good of bewitching her. Elizabeth Hubbard, meanwhile, names both Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne as her tormentors. In a dramatic incident, Elizabeth claims to be followed by a wolf, which is supposedly directed by Sarah Good, or may even be the shape-shifting Sarah herself. In 1692, Sarah Good is an impoverished woman with no permanent housing or reliable income. But things hadn't always been that way. Born Sarah Solert in about 1654, she was raised by respectable parents in Wynnum. Her father, John Solert, was likely French by birth and may have been Huguenot by faith. He worked as an innkeeper and left behind a healthy estate, but he took his own life in 1672. And unfortunately, Sarah was left in the lurch, inheriting only 3 acres of meadow. So Sarah married Daniel Poole, who promptly ran up an eye-watering debt, which Sarah was forced to pay from his meager estate after his death, leaving Sarah destitute. She next married William Good by 1683. William was a weaver and a laborer who never seemed to stay employed long. He and Sarah had to sell off the meadow to pay additional debts owed by Sarah's first husband. William Good's origins are unknown, but he had 2 children with Sarah. The first, Dorothy, was born in about 1687. The second daughter, whose name is unknown, was born in December 1691. And we have much more about Dorothy in our episode with Rachel Chris Doan that you can refer back to, learning what happened to Dorothy after the witch trials. At the time she was accused, Sarah Good was in the habit of going house to house seeking charity. She evidently was given something at least once by the Parrises, but she left the house muttering, raising suspicions. Sarah Osborne had caused a scandal when, following the 1674 death of her husband, Robert Prince, she married Alexander Osborne, her young indentured servant. She was also involved in a dispute over her husband's first estate with his kin, Thomas and John Putnam, who were the executors. By February 27, 1692, Osborne had been sick in bed for at least a year and had not been able to attend worship at the meeting house all that time. All 3 accused women were markedly different from the New England Puritan ideal of what a woman should be. All 3 were outsiders in key ways. Tituba was most clearly an outsider, being indigenous in a period when Massachusetts English settlers were at war with the Wabanaki Confederacy, an alliance of Algonquian-speaking peoples who had chosen to ally themselves with the French over the British. But Sarah Good from Wynnum was also a relative newcomer to Salem Village. Being indigent placed her further outside the norms of the community. Requesting charity was itself a risky business in the age of witch hunts, as people who refused to give what was asked for felt guilt, and then resented the one who asked. If something shortly went wrong for the refuser, say a child took ill or livestock died, perhaps, then the person who refused the gift would suspect the one they'd refused was seeking revenge through witchcraft. Lastly, Sarah Osborne had transgressed social norms by wedding a younger man and an indentured servant, and by failing to attend meetings on Sundays. With 3 women accused of witchcraft, the witch hunt was ramping up and would soon be in full swing. We'll cover the first arrests and examinations in our next 101 episode. Thank you for listening to Witch Hunt. We hope you enjoyed today's stories.
Join us every week.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.